Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. Well, very quick one today, and I'm doing this off the cuff, no script, no nothing. Because Bungie just tweeted something. Yeah, there's a new expansion that's coming along. So to all those of you who sat there and were like, man, it's so sad, Destiny's story is over forever. Whilst the rest of us were screaming, being like, they've told us about Frontiers, it exists. Yeah, here's your first physical bit of proof aside from the whole Gestures to the Frontiers announcement situation. Anyway, whatever the case, it appears this is what Apollo was meant to be. Edge of Fate. And there are immediately a few things you can tell from this particular image that has been teased. First of all, take a look just behind the text. Just really zoom in and squint. That's the Nines logo. For those of you who don't know, by the way, that is the 9 logo because each of those 3 circles is divided into a total of 9 parts. One circle has 2 parts, another has 3, and the last has 4, and 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 9. Much more prominently, though, we see that it is set at the backdrop of what can probably be described as a singularity, and that leads us to some very interesting ideas. For those of you who have not been tuned in with the 9 lore, I'm going to go over that really briefly, and just explain why I think this leads us into the next story of Destiny and some rather dramatic implications from it. Essentially, the 9 are interesting because they have been split down the middle for a while. They exist predominantly because of us. However, there is one group that thinks that in order to go on existing, they should try and support us as much as possible. This is a group of 5. This is the same group that sent Xur and the Emissary and gives us all these weapons that we can use. And then there is another group, a group of 4, and they believe they need to cut their existence away from us. They need to make it so they no longer depend on us. And what they've been doing in order to do that is to try and form a singularity. This is very much the SparkNotes version of the lore, but the attempt to build a singularity to transcend into a higher reality is something that the 9 have been attempting for a while. And as a result, if they are successful, well, they would no longer need to rely on us to exist. But, of course, if this is a singularity in the sense that we understand it, a literal black hole, then, well, there goes the whole system. And potentially a lot of other stuff. So the implications here are really clear. If we're going to sit there and see the 9 enact their plan, we might see a kind of civil war between those 2 groups. Or we might see the group of 5 finally coalesce with the group of 4, and then as a united force they would be attempting to enact this plan. Inevitably, this has come along, and this is something we can see developing now thanks to the death of the Witness. And more importantly, we did get a little preview to this. In particular, we got a preview thanks to the Division sidearm. This basically goes over that great division between the voices within that chorus of 5 and the chorus of 4. But that then leads us to another really interesting idea, which is simply that we've been getting another teaser to this, Rite of the 9. Yes, the Rite of the 9 is going to be coming along and giving us those opportunities to run 3 dungeons and gain some exclusive loot from them. However, this reprised loot of all those 12 dungeon weapons that's going to be on offer also includes a new origin trait. And that origin trait? It's called Gravity Well, if memory serves correctly. That's got to be interesting. If this is an expansion that is predominantly revolving around the 9 though, I want to go ahead and just temper some expectations really quickly, because there are going to be some notes about whether or not we might see something entirely bespoke and new within Destiny. And whilst it's likely that we will see many of the same things that we'd get with a typical expansion, think say a new explorable destination, probably a new raid, some kind of endgame activity, I imagine that we're not going to see anything along the lines of, say, an enemy faction. And the reason I say that is because the 9 are just so undefined. I mean, that's not just what's gone on with them in the game, that's literally their lore. They struggle to give themselves physical forms. The entire point of Xur and the Emissary is that, well, they're experiments in that endeavor. And previous experiments? Well, take a look at the lore of the Cocytus Gates. They have literally just created a bunch of protons, and then matter, and then something that was alive but couldn't breathe. The Nine are not very good at this. Do not expect an entire new enemy faction. That being said, that does not mean that the Nine won't necessarily manifest themselves in the world around us. They can do that, and they can do it in some strange ways. We know that the Nine have some control over the Taken, and for that matter, they have some control over the Drifter, who might also be involved if the Nine are indeed at the heart of this story. That being said, he was in Heresy, and it isn't always the case that voice actors are used in back-to-back releases, so I'm not totally sure on that one. Speaking of the Drifter though, he carries with them another great example of the fact that the Nine are able to manifest their power and change the world around them, and that's the Hall. I don't necessarily know if we're going to be going inside the Hall for this expansion, but it is a distinct possibility. After all, it's just this kind of engine of possibility, where the Nine could create whatever they want. That's kind of how they make the Prophecy Dungeon for us. The really awesome thing about this being a potential Nine expansion is that there is the possibility for mystery, for strangeness, and for the unknown. The Nine are one of the most unexplored pieces of Destiny's lore, and they are one of the least well understood pieces of Destiny's lore. They go all the way back to the foundation of the game, and they in themselves are a deep-seated Bungie lore reference. But putting all that aside, if you just want to go ahead and take a look at the kind of visual aesthetic that this is going to inspire, then you need only look at Prophecy. Prophecy, which to this day I think is arguably still one of the best dungeons in terms of its visual aesthetic. I mean, it's really hard to ignore stuff like Rainbow Road, the encounter design and aesthetic of the Cube, and even the way that it used its environments to tell stories about what was going to happen with the Season of Arrival's conclusion and the era of darkness that was soon to come. For the first step in Frontiers, it also makes at least a little sense that we would be exploring a topic like the Nine. The Light and Dark saga is over, and the Nine have not expressly been on either side in this conflict to a complete point of loyalty. There was one group that wanted nothing to do with us, and another group that supported us. But they were also the ones who initially told us that light and darkness are not necessarily forces of evil or good, and that either of them is simply a force of power. This, I think, is another kind of subliminal way of Bungie sitting there and saying, if we're going to step into this new age of Destiny, we're going to do it starting off with something that isn't necessarily tied to either. And then, of course, there is the further question, what the hell are we going to be doing with the destination on this? If the Nine are, as is commonly theorized, linked in with the planets of the solar system, that means we might not necessarily be going too far beyond its bounds. It doesn't mean that we won't be exploring strange places, though. Even within our system, there are dozens of unexplored moons, plenty of large planetoids, and even asteroids out in the asteroid belt that just haven't been properly explored yet. So, all things considered, it's hard to tell. But I think that it would be correct to say that wherever we do end up going, it's bound to be an interesting destination. I'm not expecting Prophecy visuals 24/7, but maybe as we get closer and things become more surreal, things will continue to get weirder and more wonderful. With this though, I do have a bit of a concern, and that is simply this notion that the Nine are something which is very lore-dense. Now, this is something which I want to go ahead and say is, just from my perspective, it's entirely possible that the team at Bungie will be able to go ahead and pull this off. However, I am concerned that a story about the Nine to start off this new saga of Destiny is going to be a somewhat tricky one to understand. It's entirely possible that Bungie could simply use that depth as a means of pulling people in, but if you're going to try and make this a jumping on point for the franchise, as for some it might be, then you've got to remember to start slow and to use the fundamentals of the story to not get too crazy. We can't sit there and immediately jump into the idea of dark matter dust. However, there are definitely some key points about the Nine that need to be communicated. And, well, we need to not lose players along the way. This, I think, is going to be one of the toughest challenges for Bungie. That and also getting back lapsed players. I have to say that Edge of Fate is an awesome name for it. I love the idea. But I also wonder whether this is going to be something that can appeal to players who have lapsed. That I think is the biggest challenge, and I think that it's so large that there's no way Bungie isn't aware of it. Ultimately, though, we have to wait and see. But for what it's worth, I think there is something to be noted about heresy. It pertains to something that I saw recently from a fellow content creator who I've not actually spoken to, but I've definitely seen videos from now. Their name is Whitelight, and recently they made a video about how they fell out of love with Destiny, which they call in the title their favorite game. There is a lot of passion that you can tell comes from a real Destiny fan who has lapsed in the time being. And, well, there's one sentence in there that really resonates with me. It was simply that we've moved from questions to answers. The 9 are nothing but questions. And I think this is an opportunity for Bungie to introduce more of them. And I do hope that whilst there is a satisfying conclusion to whatever story is offered, that we do start this new era with more questions. Questions are what drive us. Questions are what Destiny has been lacking for a long time, because questions represent mystery, and they represent a world that might be bigger than us, more unknown than us, something that we have to challenge and conquer, and might not even succeed against. This is something that I think was initially done with Heresy. For the first time in ages, there's a lore mystery afoot with the Unknown Master, the Lord of Every Nothing, that doesn't really have an answer. We haven't seen it properly, we've just seen its influence and its effects. We don't truly know what's going on with it. Then there are further bits and pieces of lore that have been built up still. The potential influence that the Winnower may or may not have, what the relationship of Oryx was like to the Winnower and then to the Witness, what caused Oryx's change of heart that made him abandon certain ways of the sword logic. These are questions, and they don't have answers. And that's good, because with these fundamental moves forward in the plot, I can speculate and I can talk about it all I want, but ultimately, with Heresy having concluded, we still don't have all the answers. And sometimes that's how it should be. And no, I'm not saying that every single time we run through a campaign, we should get our allotted single, veil, or radial mast. No, God no, absolutely not. What I would say is that if you're looking at something in Destiny, and it is providing you with a clear answer at the end of a campaign, that's good. But if you're looking at something in the lore that hints at something far off, or something removed from your current context, we don't need an answer to that all the time. And that's nice. The 9 can provide plenty of template for this. And you know what? Fascinated to see what Bungie does with it. So, that's my hope. Let's all make a little prayer that Edge of Fate is more questions than it is answers. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and with all that being said, if you did, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on email notifications. Remember, if you did like it, go ahead and leave a like and leave your thoughts down below in the comments section. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.